Lecture series this year focused on Native peoples and conservation. Our speaker tonight is Linda Hogan. Next week's speaker is Steve Siebert. He is a professor of tropical ecology here at the University of Montana, and his talk is going to be about native use, management, and knowledge of tropical forests in Indonesia. And now on to Linda Hogan. I have two people to thank for bringing her here tonight. First is Kate Shanley, who's the director of the Native American Studies Department. She had the brilliant idea for us to invite Linda, and she has generously helped sponsor a visit and host Linda's visit here, so thank you, Kate. And Phil Condon, who's a professor in environmental studies who runs the Environmental Writing Institute, has also helped to sponsor Linda's visit. Thank you, Phil, and ran a workshop today on nature writing with some students from the program. And finally, I want to thank the Montana Museum of Art and Culture for generously donating art for this series. This piece of work here for Linda's poster was done by Kevin Redstar, and it's titled Elk Medicine Helpers Lodge. So tonight we have Kate Shanley to introduce Linda Hogan. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Nikki. It's a great pleasure to introduce Linda Hogan, and also I need to acknowledge someone, and that is the Calvin B. Stott family contributes money to Native American Studies to sponsor speakers. We have a series of speakers coming up in relation to a Native American Studies course as well on Plains Indian women, and you can check with NAS if you have an interest in that course. But we always thank Calvin B. Stott because they're exceedingly generous to us. The family supports Native American people in education as well as environmental issues. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Linda Hogan, to have her at the University of Montana. I think she's been in Missoula before anyway, but this is the first time we've been in the town at the same time. She is Chickasaw and is an internationally recognized public speaker and author of poetry, fiction, and essays. Her books include novels Mean Spirit, a winner of the Oklahoma Book Award, the Mountains and Plains Book Award, and a finalist for the Pulitzer. Solar Storm, a finalist for the International Impact Award and Power. W.W. Norton is her publisher. Her poetry, The Book of Medicines, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her other poetry has received the Colorado Book Award, Minnesota State Arts Grant, an American Book Award, and a prestigious Lannan Fellowship. In addition, she has received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Guggenheim, and has received the Lifetime Achievement Award from both the Native American Writers Circle of the Americas and Wordcraft Circle. Her nonfiction includes Dwellings. I think she's going to read from that tonight, one of my favorite things she's written, A Spiritual History of the Land, and The Woman Who Watches Over the World, a Native memoir. In addition, she has, with Brenda Peterson, written Sightings, The Mysterious Journey of the Gray Whale for National Geographic Books. She has edited several anthologies on nature and spirituality and written the script Everything Has a Spirit, a PBS documentary on American Indian freedom, religious freedom. Linda has also been involved for 13 years with the Native Science Dialogues and the new Native American Academy. I can hardly imagine a person with better credentials. So please welcome Linda Hogan.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here tonight. I was thinking about being part of a series on conservation, and wondering if I was here as an environmentalist, an environmental writer, an ecologist, or a historian, or what my role here is. So I'm going to talk, and then I was introduced as a poet, the poet. So I'm going to read poetry, and I'll read a little bit of dwellings, and then I'm going to just talk for a while too. Maybe I'll start out with a little bit from dwellings. You know, it's not just in the native understanding of the world, this continent, but in European stories as well, that the world is alive and speaking and resonant. And everyone, I was thinking about this on the way here, what I was going to talk about, and thinking about where I live and all the layers that are, the languages that are around me. And I bored students today talking about ants because that's become one of my big interests, and I won't go on. But I was thinking about the languages of the ants, which are chemical messages, and trees, which are hormonal. And that there are languages, I live out in the sticks, and there are the languages of the deer, and they have a lot of different languages. Some of them are through the way they move, the way they turn, or some of them are their voices. I hear them talking to their little ones, and you know, they sound very interesting. I'd like to know what they're saying. But there's also the language of the wasps that live there, the snake, and the crow, which has a very large vocabulary. And so I realized that even space around me is alive, and it's full. We live in a world of life, and we live in a world of beauty and balance. And our work is to maintain that balance and to maintain that beauty. Our responsibility is to try to keep ourselves and it whole. And we can even call it, in Western language, a molecular world, you know, like it's all present. I mean, this space moved when my hands moved, just to let them pass through. So, you know, I'm thinking too, there's the language of the night sky, that when you know the night sky, you know the stories that it's telling. And it tells, not only does it tell stories, but there are stories all over the country about the night sky that are different than the stories that all of us have learned in school, where you have Venus and Mars and beings from Western Greek mythology. Years ago, I was in Chicago at a museum, and I found this piece of leather that was called a Skiddy Pawnee star bundle. And it was a piece of leather that was marked with the star chart. And the Milky Way was a herd of antelope. And one of the constellations was ducks swimming. And I began becoming interested in native astronomy and started talking to my friend Nancy Maryboy, who has started doing Navajo. She's Navajo and Cherokee, and she does a Navajo traveling planetarium where she goes to schools and then she tells the story of what the sky is. And so in the Navajo night sky, there's a feather, there's a rattlesnake. I think Orion is called the first slender one and has to do with planting, and it's like when the first sprouts come up. And she was also talking about the time of year that most of us don't take notice of certain things, but if you've lived here for tens of thousands of years, people have taken notice and they remember all of this. Or, I always think of remember like Mare de la Sour said, remember, like to put it back together. That there's a time of the year where two constellations meet, where the feather meets with another constellation, and at that time, there's lightning strikes start striking. And that's the time when the lightning in the Western science world, I can say that the lightning puts nitrogen into the earth. The Florida mangrove area is what is that? The river of grass. What do you call that? Everglades. It's the lightning capital of the world because the mangroves are the newest earths on the planet. They create earth as they move outward, and the lightning provides nitrogen for things to grow. So when the lightning strikes at that time, then it's time for the planting to begin. So they know the seasons, they know the sky and how everything works by those seasons. There are also tribes that, the Milky Way is the tracks of the raven running. And I really like that because I always think of all the bird prints and how they move. And also in Pueblo mythology, or Pueblo astronomy, I should say, the Milky Way is called the endless path, the endless one, which is true, really, in a way, when we think about how many galaxies are out there, and we're only one little planet in the tail of a spiral galaxy, in a world of 500,000 universes, and that we know of. I mean, we know no edge, no boundaries out there. The thing that's so important about knowing this, about telling this, is that for Native peoples, it's significant to remember the stories because so much knowledge is held in the stories and in the ceremonies. There is also a book that came out in the 30s, which I thought was very interesting, and it was done by a Catholic priest who lived in Navajo land, called The Upward Moving Way, Father Berard Hale. And it's about a ceremony, and it's about the pull of the plant coming upward and going downward at the same time as the root does, these two opposite directions of life. And in Navajo, everything is polar. There's, if you say dawn, then you say dusk, in a ceremony. I mean, if there's female rain, there's male rain. So this pull is in itself amazing, this beginning life. But then as the plant grows, the ceremony contains every insect, every tree, every plant, every animal, everything that happens around this plant, showing a knowledge of the ecosystem. And it gradually grows outward until the whole universe is taken in. So if a patient is being healed, and this is the ceremony that's being used, the patient is being placed in their place within their natural world, their community, the larger world outside, and all the way out. And that's what's so significant for us, especially when we think of conservation, is that we know our place as humans. And I was talking to a class today and saying, think about one of the languages that has no word for I. It has no word I. And then you think of yourself, and this is exactly what it is to have no I. Well, that was fun. How many times do we get to do that? It's a good thing I'm not trying to read. So, you think of that, not having that self, not having a self, but being part of everything else. And then you have a real understanding of conservation and participation within the wild. There was a psychologist named C.A. Meyer that talked about how as the wilderness outside humans decrease, the wilderness inside increases. And at that time was the time of the jogger in Central Park. The boys were out wilding, and they attacked this woman and nearly killed her. And it was interesting that they would even use that term, having grown up in New York and living there all their life, the idea of being wild. But the thing is that that's wild in the Western sense, and we have to split the two in a way to talk about so many of these things, because there are different ways of knowing and understanding the world, and different layers of meaning that come with different cultures. So your understanding of the world is shaped by the language you live and how you grow, the philosophies under which you grow. But we do have to think about the wilderness inside, even in that Western term, and what that means in response to what's outside, and how we think about that we're a part of this endlessly creative universe. And I guess I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to talk about a spiritual ecology, and maybe those words summarize what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure. So since I'm starting to kind of go off a little bit here, I'll do a little bit of reading. And I was talking about the world being alive, the world communicating. And in the Western way, the Western traditions of consciousness, it's not just original or aboriginal ways of knowing, but Orpheus in mythology, and maybe not in mythology, maybe in real life, was able to communicate with the worlds of animals and plants, the water, and the minerals. Psyche, for whom psychology was named, fell weeping upon the ground, and while she was there, the ants offered a solution to the impossible task she was assigned, that of separating a mountain of grain before dawn. The river reeds also passed their secrets to Psyche, instructing her in the way to gather wool from golden sheep. From nearly all traditions, account after account tells of stones giving guidance, as with Crazy Horse, the Lakota prophet and politician, who took his direction from a stone he wore beneath his arm. That stone was given to him by a medicine man named Chips, and he always wore it. There are tales of the trees singing the corn that is called by the Mayan people the grace, telling stories of inner earth. In recent time, the term myth has come to signify falsehood, but when we examine this, we find that they are a high form of truth, the deepest, innermost cultural stories of our human journeys towards spiritual and psychological growth. An essential part of myth is that it allows for our return to creation, to another time, to a place where the worlds come together. There was in Alaska, there was a philosopher that was really a powerful philosopher but unknown, named Peter Kalifornsky, and he talked about dreams. And he talked about there's sometimes a place where things meet, that it's not that you dream of an animal, and it's not that you have a spirit animal because you dreamed of one or something like that, but there are times and places where other things meet, where other worlds meet. Octavio Paz, the poet and thinker, has written that in older oral traditions, an object and its name were not separated. One equaled the other. To speak of corn, for instance, was to place the corn before a person's ears and eyes. It was in mythic time that there was no abyss between the word and the thing it named, but he adds that as soon as man acquired consciousness of himself, he broke away from the natural world and made himself an other world inside himself, which is very interesting to think about because that's the world of the I that we want to break away from. And we were talking about writing today, and I was saying that you can't really write from the self. You have to write from whatever that other thing outside you is, that magic. Or that reality, if you want to call it that. Trying to pay attention to what's around. Dwellings is called The Spiritual History of the Natural World, which is the title of this speech. And it's about a sunflower, actually. It's about a lot of things in my community of people and animals and plants and ants. I've been talking about these incredible ant stories all day, and so everybody's tired of hearing about them. But I didn't tell them that there are ant ceremonies all over the world. And so in Aboriginal Australia, there is the green ant ceremony and a honey ant dreaming. And in Navajo, there's a red antway. And so you have to think the ants are important, that over time, some of us have recognized their intelligence and their consciousness. But this is about a sunflower, which actually ants support, because ants help open sunflowers. They go up and eat the sticky stuff that holds their little plant together. They have a lot of purposes. Tonight I walk. I am watching the sky. I think of the people who came before me and how they knew the placement of stars in the sky. Watch the moving sun long and hard enough to witness how a certain angle of light touched a stone only once a year. Without written records, they knew the gods of every night, the small, fine details of the world around them and of immensity above. Walking, I can almost hear the redwoods beating, and the oceans are above me here, rolling clouds heavy and dark, considering snow. On the dry red road, I pass the place of the sunflower, that dark and secret location where creation took place. I wonder if it will return this summer, if it will multiply and move up to the other stand of flowers in a territorial struggle. It's winter, and there is smoke from the fires. The square-lighted windows of houses are fogging over. It is a world of elemental attention, of all things working together, listening to what speaks in the blood. Whichever road I follow, I walk in the land of many gods, and they love and eat one another. Walking, I am listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. I think of that I'm here tonight because my ancestors walked over the Trail of Tears and survived for the future, and I'm surviving for the future as well. I keep telling my daughter that. Well, since I'm the poet, I guess I get to read poetry, which makes me very happy. I was thinking about the work of the poet, which is so complex, and when I think about it, and once in a while I read about it or I think about it, and there's an article in Orion, I think it's this Orion this month, it's on Poetry's Place, and a friend emailed it to me, and I read a little bit of it, and it was really good because it was talking about the power of each word in its own right and what the word does. And one person who I think was a great writer and thinker was Wilson Harris, and he said that he was talking about language, that poetry was language threaded into space of time, which is prior to human discourse. And so I think that one of the things that poetry works at, and maybe essays too, when they're lyrical, is to take you back to the time before language, to the feeling before language, so that the word itself takes you to the primal, to the origin, and to the place you come from. Turtle watchers. Old mother at water's edge used to bow down to them, the turtles coming in from the sea, their many eggs, their eyes streaming water like tears, and I'd see it all. Old mother, as if in prayer, the turtles called back to where they were born, the hungry watchers standing at the edge of trees, hoping for food when darkness gathers. Years later, swimming in murky waters, a sea turtle swam beside me, both of us watching as if clasped together in the lineages of the same worlds, the sweep of the same current, even rising for breath of air at the same time, still watching. My ancestors called them the keepers of doors, and the shore is a realm to other worlds, both ways, and water moves the deep shift of life back to birth and before, as if there is a path where beings truly meet, as if I am rounding the human corners. This is a new poem, and it's very different than what I normally do, I think. It's called Hearts. My grandson is now 10 years. Just yesterday, he was 10 years old. And, but before he was born, I was looking at him in the ultrasound. In fact, I got to watch him be born, and my poor daughter was just there. And he was so big, she had a cesarean section, and everybody was so worried about her until they saw him, and it was like he was bigger than her. And even the nurses and the doctor and everybody said, "Oh my God, he's so big all at once." Hearts. Looking through sound at my grandson before he is born, the spine in the darkness, the small white heart beating, I saw them lift him to the world later. Oh, he has loved our horses, been my green branch. Now he knows anger, thicket, fire. When I was a girl, I sat on the rung of a ladder and asked my father if he had killed anyone during the war. I remember the birds were singing and how he, that gentle man, changed to anger, narrowed eyes, never asked that question again. Oh, the astonishing shadows of men and women in the light of a simple question. When I saw the war, the burning children, I wanted to hurt the killers. It is the way one metal in the presence of a magnet becomes magnetic. The God took away something from some of us, and the heart is the first thing to go. Some days I think of that small, unborn heart plucked from the stem of infancy. Some days I want to give myself to no part of humanity, fallen from the ladder, so old now it has lost its rungs, just 2 sticks of wood trying to walk. Skin boats. I know a man that makes skin boats up near James Bay, and I'm always amazed thinking of how hard it is to use the willow and stretch the caribou skin and do all that work. And especially when it's cold all the time, I just don't think I'd do it. I'd go get some kind of like a, heater and buy a kayak. But it's a good tradition, and it's brought back, and skin boats are really wonderful to maneuver, and they're good for hunting. North, watching men stretch the hide, the curve around wood, the willow shoots for ribs, as if creating a body, skin over wood that might start to breathe, that will pass through broken waters, away from searching ravens, just like the ancestors are there inside the curve of skin, moving you, saying, may you know peace, may you live in a world without weapons, and remember as you pass through and across, wearing the skin of the animal, sitting with the tree, being the tree that life flowed through, its bare roots for now not holding tight to earth. Remember the shore that surrounds a continent, the history of life as it is spoken, along the edges, thresholds of all enchanted worlds. The first ones say this, pretending to be the breaking waves, and then you can set out, crying out in all your full vigor. I love that last line, and I admit I stole it from a movie. I heard a movie and they said something about full vigor, and I wrote it down really fast. I thought, wow, full vigor, that's a really good word. Those are really two really good words. Speaking of enchantment, one time I was fortunate enough to go to the Yaqui deer dance. And the deer dance is a long ceremony, and a special human male is chosen to be the deer and dances at the end all night dressed in white. And it began long ago in the enchanted world of the forest. And yet, you know, the dance takes place in the desert. It's very far from the forest, although the ceremony involves bringing in things from the forest and the evergreen sprigs and flowers and things. And there's a story about, there are a lot of songs that go with the deer dance. There are books and books, if you look, on all the songs and the stories and the origins of the deer, the people. But the story begins with the deer coming out of the woods in the springtime with wildflowers on its antlers. And I always thought that that was a really beautiful image, to think that the deer had been walking through the flowers and that they were on its antlers. And it's the beginning of the enchanted world. And when you think of that, and you think of language, that's enchantment is like incant. So it's like a canto. It's like the world is a song, which is why there are so many songs that go with this enchanted world and this ceremony, because the ceremony itself takes you back into that enchanted world, the song world, the spoken world, the encanted world. Deer dance. This morning, when the chill that rises up from the ground is warmed, the snow is melted where the small deer slept. See how the bodies leave their mark. The snow reveals their paths on the hillsides, the white overcrossing pathways into the upper meadows where water comes forth and streams begin. With a new snow, the unseen becomes seen. Rivers begin this way. At the deer dance last year, after the clashing forces of human good and evil, the men dressed in black, the women mourning for what was gone, the evergreen sprigs carried in a circle to show the return of spring. That night, after everything human was resolved, a young man, the chosen, became the deer. In the white skin of its ancestors, wearing the head of the deer above the human head, with flowers in his antlers, he danced. Beautiful and tireless, until he was more than human, until he too was deer. Of all those who were transformed into animals, the travelers Circe turned into pigs, the woman who became the bear, the girl who always remained the child of wolves. None of them wanted to go back to being human. And I would do it too, leave off being human, and become what it was that slept outside my door last night, rested in my sleep. One evening I hid in the brush south of here and watched at the place where they shed their antlers. And where the deer danced, it was true, as my old grandmother said, water came up from the ground, and I could hear them breathing at the crooked river. The road there I know, I live here, and always when I walk it, they are not quite sure of me, looking back now and then to see that I am still far enough away, their gray-brown bodies, the scars of fences, the fur never quite straight, as if they just stepped into it. You know how they have all the little curls on their cowlicks on their fur? Oh, I want to read a poem called Buffalo. And everybody knows the history of Buffalo here. It's so ironic. I live on the exit, the Buffalo to Buffalo Bill's grave. I live the other way. He lives that way. But I don't know if he's really buried there, if they just pretend like he is. But it's amazing to me how many tourists actually want to go to Buffalo Bill's grave. And, he really didn't do anything. I mean, all he did was kill buffalo, and he was a hero. And I always thought that was the strangest thing. And here buffalo are the sacred animals. And the next exit is the buffalo herd overlook. And so at the next exit is our buffalo herd, our local buffalo herd. And so, here's Buffalo Bill dead. And then here we have all these buffalo out here alive, and you have to find them because they can go under places and they have a lot of room to travel. But one of my friends came down from Canada, and she wanted to see the buffalo and take pictures of them, and we drove around for about 3 hours and we never found a single buffalo. But anyway, I want to dedicate this poem to my friend Sharon Brogan. And you know why. She once gave me a very generous gift. Return, Buffalo. One man made a ladder of stacked up yellow bones to climb the dead toward his own salvation. He wanted light and fire, wanted to reach and be close to his God. But his God was the one who opened his shirt and revealed the scar of mortal climbing. It is the scar that lives in the house with me. It goes to work with me. It is the people I have loved who fell into the straight, unhealed line of history. It is a brother who heard the bellowing cry of sacred hills when nothing was there but stories and rocks. It was what ghost dancers heard in their dream of bringing buffalo down from the sky, as if song and prayer were paths life would follow back to land. And the old women, they say, would walk that land, pick through bones for hide, marrow, anything that could be used or eaten. Once they heard a terrible moan and stood back, and one was not dead, or it had come back from there, walked out of the dark mountains of rotted flesh and bony fur, like a prophet coming out from the hills, with a vision too unholy to tell. It must have traveled the endless journey of fear, returned from the far reaches where men believed the world was flat, and they would fall over its sharp edge into pitiless fire. And they must have thought how life came together was a casual matter, war a righteous sin, and betrayal wasn't a round, naked thing that would come back to them one day. Okay, I would like to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to skip to this last poem. Well, two poems, because This other one is good for our the conversation as we began it, talking about all the layers of the world and taking those layers off of taking the layers off of ourselves, so that we can understand conservation, understand the land. Like the whole land has stories. This entire continent has different names and different stories. And one of the things that I think is very significant happening in Canada is that the people are taking back the land names. And one group of Cree, they have a group of villages, and the villages represent and are in the shape of their concept of the creator. And so one village is called the creator's elbow, and one is called the creator's knee, and one is the eyebrow. So the entire creator is there, and that creation on the land mirrors also what is in the sky. And it's way too complex for me to understand, but I'm just telling you that there's a connection between the sky and the land and how this works. This is called gentling the human. There are 5 holy spaces in the body: the heart, the spirit, the secret, the mysterious, and the deeply hidden. These are the ones with the power of gentling the human. And the human is clouds, lung, mist, and heart, a pulse at the wrists, and the spirit, which belongs to the mountain. And since it's said we come to the east, where first life might pass over a lake one day, or drift toward the ocean like the wind it came from, or follow a slant of snow, then there may be one of these, a place where the spirit sets down. And it's said we come from the wind, born from it, yet we are given flesh and bone, the milk teeth which fall when a child passes through. A human is breath, current, and tide, yet merely a woman of light, a man of fire, the bare skin so vulnerable, fragrant, and leaf-blessed as we are. Here she comes, walking. Here he is, as if undressed from the body, as if the abyss is beautiful, and no thing there can hold you down. This is the time when the spirit has no need for teeth, and in the time it takes pollen to light, the wild world tames us. Oh, it is so soft and full, the human now, and suddenly you are in the clearing. To the east is the mountain with sweet, sweet rain. There's a river and mountain sutra that I like. It's a Buddhist sutra, and there's a line in it that says, "The mountains walk, but just not in our time, just not in a way that we can see them or understand them." This is called eucalyptus. I'd had surgery on my foot and had some bones fused and things like that, and I was in a wheelchair, and I was at a native science dialogue, and I wouldn't miss it for anything. I don't care if I were in 2 wheelchairs, I was going to be there. But there was a ceremony in the morning outside, and I couldn't go. And it was all right, because I went out and went on the deck, and it was in California, and there were eucalyptus, and we don't have those where I live, and they were really beautiful, and they smelled really good. And so this is called eucalyptus. It is the first red light of morning, and the others are praying outside with old songs, sage and tobacco, while I have been dreaming from the deep, taking in the red light rising between the eucalyptus trees and their fragrance. They dropped 3 seeds in the shadows, 3 deep shrines, worlds becoming. I can hold them. And the naked bark, its spare intimacy that peels back and reveals its other layers, deeper, earlier. without effort, that beautiful undoing, the smooth newness. Some of the religious say the five senses are thieves. So let's say I am stolen because my senses are all awake. And like the tree, I can lose myself layer after layer, all the way down to infinity. And that's when the world has eyes and sees. The whole world loves the unlayered human. Okay, thank you. That red light that morning that I thought was dawn was actually dust from a sandstorm in Mongolia. They travel long distances. You know, Chernobyl, when Chernobyl had a meltdown, that's an interesting word, Chernobyl. Translated into English, it's wormwood. And wormwood is a medicine for pain, but it's also a toxic poison. And I was really surprised to learn that. But the wind spoke. The wind told the story. The Russians were going to keep it secret, and they picked up the radiation in Switzerland or Norway, one of those countries, and they picked it up in the air, and they realized that there had been a nuclear accident. So, you know, thinking about the sandstorms from Mongolia, I mean, we really are a small planet, small world. Okay, I'm ready for questions, accusations, whatever. You mean I'm going to have to ask you guys questions? Okay.
I was thinking about what the process that I've been going through for a while is transplanted European, and that I feel like a lot of my friends are going through that I've found through me, and in feeling like I'm reconnecting with the natural world in all these different ways. And anytime I come into a surge of feeling like I'm burning more and more, it's always balanced by this intense feeling of grief and care. And I've come to this logical conclusion that you can't open yourself to beauty without opening yourself to everything else as well. And I feel like amongst a lot of my friends who are all white and younger, we struggle with a way to deal with that and keep going. And mixed in with that is not having our own stories and not being really sensitive to not wanting to appropriate other people's ways of feeling. And it's not a specific question.
I know I was supposed to repeat the questions, but you should be up here saying that into the microphone. You should be here with me. For those of you who did everybody hear that? No? He was talking about learning new, shifting consciousness really in a way, and starting to learn the world, and that when he does, he feels grief. And also, it's hard to be a transplanted person, not from this continent, but to be a European American or wherever somebody comes from, and feel that you have no stories, and to not want to appropriate native stories. But I think that, one of my experiences, at least, is that as Indian people, we're usually willing to be pretty open and to invite non-Indian people to our dances, for instance. And but I think that one of the things that happens is when you realize that the world is in a constant state of fluidity and transformation, it's an ongoing story. Everything is an ongoing story. And even if you're new here, you can be in your place. You can be in your place. You look around, you learn the world around you, and you're in your place. And maybe you'll never be from this continent. Maybe you don't have a language that's 10,000 years old, or you don't have stories that go way back, and there is a sense of grief and loss. And those of us who are native feel a sense of grief and loss about that too, because, most indigenous people have been colonized, have been taken away from where they've lived and put in other places. We were taken away. We were sent over to Oklahoma. Oklahoma was supposed to be Indian territory. All the tribes were supposed to be there in Indian territory, and then the United States government was going to build a big fence around it so nobody could get out. And they chased Black Kettle and his band through Goodland, Kansas to Oklahoma and back so many times it eroded the land. But, it was like nobody wanted to go there. And so we went over the Trail of Tears, and we lost our breed of horses. They became the American quarter horse. They used to be Chickasaw ponies, smaller and stronger, and some of them may still exist in wild bands. We lost the stories of our astronomy at that time. We had to go back to the mounds, and as a tribe, people have traveled back and even walked the trail. And going back to the mounds and trying to look at the mounds and figure out the astronomy, and then read what the for some of us, if there hadn't been early observers, we would have had great losses. And one of I was writing, and maybe it wasn't in Dwellings, it might have been in Woman Who Watches Over the World, about a man who kept notes, wrote letters to his father about this mineral mountain and the cures of the minerals. And of course we use them now, calcium, lithium, for health reasons. And so he was writing all these minerals and telling his father in Europe and sending him letters. And his letters were what kept that knowledge alive for the people, because they were so devastated by warfare against them that it was all they could do to sustain the few people who were left. So, it's not an easy thing, but we can all have our responsibility and all know our own place. I don't know if that is a good response to that, but when you do open yourself to the world, yes, there's grief, because the world feels grief. But there's beauty and happiness and joy too, because the world feels that too. In fact, I think one of our responsibilities is to be happy. I just think that's a responsibility we have. What other thing is there? Yes, you have a question in the blue shirt.
You talked about this sort of poetic way of knowing the world, and I'd like you to sort of describe how that fits into conservation and fitting a land ethic or just a conservation piece into the poetry. How does that fit together?
How does the land ethic or conservation fit into the poetry or into language?
Yeah.
Well, there wouldn't be a word land ethic probably if Aldo Leopold hadn't written Sand County Almanac. So that's a starter. So the language creates a new way of thinking. So by communicating it, by telling it, by passing it along, you're creating a land ethic. If you weren't in school learning conservation and having someone standing in front of you telling you about aspen tree aspen trees as organisms, as families, you wouldn't know that. And you wouldn't respect those aspen trees in the way that you do when you know that. If I hadn't talked about the ants today taking care of caterpillars and then releasing them when they're butterflies, people probably would never think of, people that hear that will never think of ants in the same way. And when I talked about them building structures and being a single consciousness, me joining in and handing them sticks, you had a dirty piece of paper, throw it out, they had a bottle of soda, well, not those because there was a deposit on them. But just trash. People just threw trash right outside, and outside the car window or whatever. And, we have come a long way in terms of conservation, but people had to use conservation in the past. You'd have to take your jar to the store to get something refilled and things like that, yeah. I like your grandmother.
I'm now teaching my grandson, we go and pick up trash along the road, and we pick up tin cans so that he can get the money, but we pick up trash too. And so he asked me, Grandma, why are we picking up the trash? And I said, have you ever seen a healthy deer eating a piece of trash? And he laughed at me and he goes, oh, Grandma. And I said, well, think about it. It's the right thing to do. And so I like where I live, and so I want it to be nice for you when you guys get older too and Grandma's gone. So I've started a tradition.
Good, thank you. Yes.
We talked early on about the difference between, or the effect of the loss of wilderness on us. I'm seeing that more and more and in my own personal life. What do you think the implications of, not having nature in someone's life, not having wilderness left for anyone to enjoy, and not having any true nature left at all? What are the implications from your perspective on the human race and on the world?
So what are the, not having wilderness, what effect does that have on the human, on us and on the world? Well, when there's probably no true wilderness, nothing that's been untouched. Minnesota, I found a book that was a self-published book when I was there called The Trees Go Forth. And there are a lot of forests there. People associate Minnesota with forests, but they're not the real forests. They're not the forests that they were. And this young man was 14 and he worked as a bookkeeper, and he could do math. So he was hired to work for a lumber company, and they clear-cut trees there. And, in Washington and Oregon, they just come one big truck after another with the giant trees. One trunk can go on the truck. They're so big. And so not having that, once they're gone, that's gone from the universe forever. And this is the only, as far as we know, this is the only place that we know that has these lives. We have these lives. And they're significant. We can talk about it from an ecological perspective. If you deforest the rainforest, all the water in the world never changes. There's always the same amount, never more or less. So the water from the rainforest has to go somewhere else. So you have a flood somewhere or a hurricane. You have global warming right now being a major problem, not just with the weather, but I was just reading that 75% of the seal pups just were killed when waves washed up they usually would be born on a glacier near St. Lawrence, and the melting was so much that there wasn't enough room, and so when a wave came, it washed the seal pups away because they didn't have enough glacier. So we lose that. we lose all that life. And when we lose the life around us, we lose something that's in our own nature too. We lose a part of ourselves. And really, it's our work in life, you know, and the jobs of the future are going to be in putting this world back together. So, young students, pay attention. But it is even one life, you know. I mean, what's that story that the Humane Society sends out once a year with when they want you to give them some money at the end of the year, about the boy who picks up the one fish from the sea and throws it back in, and his grandfather says, you know, it doesn't make any difference, there's so many of them, and he's picking them up and throwing them back in, and he said, well, it makes a difference to those, you know, to the ones I just put in. So that's it. We want to preserve what we can. And we don't know the value of everything. We don't know. Some of the plants that we're losing, like some of the diseases and the viruses that came out of deforestation in certain places, and I'm sure the guy that talks next time about Indonesia will talk about this, but many illnesses came from the deep forests. And the antidotes for those are in those forests. And those plants are now gone. The herbs that would heal them are now gone. And that was written in the New Yorker? There was this huge article in October about 12 years ago about that. That's where I first read it. And I was thinking, well, you know, this is really amazing when you think about how quickly the world really is being deforested, and that the droughts in places, water's leaving certain places. So, you know, we really do have to pay attention. Did that answer your question at all? Yes. Okay, good. Because I know I just went off on a tangent there. Yes.
I'm just wondering, what advice would you give a young Native American in today's society who's trying to find themselves between their traditional culture and modern society?
Well, you know, the really hard thing about being Indian in America is that you have to know both cultures. You have to be twice as smart as everybody else to survive. It's really hard. So you have to know how the non-Indian people think and how that world is and how it works. And you have to know how your own world is and how it works and how your own people think. And my advice would be to look as much as you can back at all the knowledge of other tribes and your own, and spend as much time with elders as you can, but also to remember balance. To walk in balance, to, you know, the Navajo word, hojo, to be in balance. And we want to maintain that human balance and place in the world and integrity. And I think it's hard when you're, you know, I think from your presentation earlier when you were talking, I wanted to come to that conference really bad, but, you know, when you're in ACES, when you're in, like, the sciences, the thing is that you have to make a distinction between Western science and indigenous science, because our knowledge systems are not the same, and they're not based on the same things. Indigenous knowledge systems are completely, they're in separate categories, because there are people who have not been separated from the land and who really know that, you know, it's so funny. I organized a conference for elders to come and talk about animals, and Howard Luke up in Alaska was saying how, you know, you have to be careful how you treat the animals, because they'll talk about it. The other ones will know, and when you go hunting, you'll have bad luck hunting. And he was an old man, you know, and he was saying that, and young people would think maybe that's silly. But he was saying something that was very wise and really true. You have to be careful how you talk about the animals, how you live your life, and what you do. But, I think you really have to make a distinction between the two ways and do them both. I don't think they always come together. I think sometimes they just cross over. You make a bridge now and then. That's my thought. That's my opinion. I'm very opinionated about that. But I don't think that any people are better or worse or anything like that. It's like, as I'm not passing a judgment, I'm just saying that there really are different ways of knowing. And like I was saying today, like Navajo language has 58,000 more verbs than we have in the entire English language. And English is my first language, not Chickasaw. And so when I think about that, I think, well, okay, my mind and my knowledge is really limited because I don't understand that universe. I could never understand, that's not my language. It's a language of movement and not nouns. It's verbs. It's a world that's much more complex in thought than what English thinkers have. And so the knowledge system of a Navajo is greater than what my knowledge system is. And when I try to understand that, and I do because I have friends that are from there, and it's like the complexity of it is takes you a lifetime to think about or understand, and you'd really have to learn the language and learn all those verbs. But I was saying that they're in different linguistic categories too, like by movement, a grasshopper and lightning would be in the same linguistic category because they move alike. So, we have completely different ways of understanding the world if we live in a noun world or if we live in a verb world or a process world. Like if you speak Anishinaabe, you live in a world where you don't just have a cup of coffee. You go through you make coffee, and it's told how you make the coffee. It's like, oh, you pour the thing through the, whatever you do to make the coffee. You pour the water through the coffee machine, and that's how you say coffee. It's the whole process of it. Or how you instead of saying pie, it's the thing you do, where you put the pastry over the berries. So that's what a pie is. And so that's a process world. And it's very different than a noun world. It's how I talk now that I'm getting older, too. It's like that thing that has a handle that you use when the floor is dirty? What do you call that? Kate.
If you listen to the news, you know that Vice President Cheney shot someone. And it took him a day to allow the public to know that he did it. So we live in a world in which basic ethics and honesty are not forthcoming. And so I wonder what you do personally to keep your spirit alive and healthy. And I wonder how you intersect politically with that world. Because we can't have a parallel world if we're going to change environmental ethics.
Well, it wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't strapped him to the top of the car. No, I'm sorry. It's true. We live in a world of lies right now. And, I know it's not always going to be like that because we now know. I think that they would have kept it a secret. And I think if he died, it would have never been told. But the man who told was the man who owned the ranch where they were hunting. And, Cheney was verbally attacked for another canned hunt in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. I mean, he does canned hunts where they have no choice. The animals have no choice. They're not like really hunting. They're just going in, they're electric fences, they release them, then they say, you know, here they are. And so, yeah, we live in a very difficult world right now. It's not just lies, but violence. I mean, to think that I would have never thought that we would be a people who torture. You know, like, I thought other people did that. I didn't think it was us. I mean, I thought, yes, Vietnam was a terrible mistake, and we did our young men were boys at the time and did some things that were terrible, and there were massacres. But I thought it would never happen, that we would become the kind of people that we've become. So, and how do I keep my spirit alive? I just don't know, but I am an activist. And, you know, I was talking today about how much work it is. I'm fighting a project right now. It's a dam that's going into the canyon where I live, up above where I live. And it's basically people who have money who live on the other side of the mountain and don't want to look at a water reservoir, a dam over there. And they're building this enormous monstrosity that's right in the middle of open space, where people like to go to recreate themselves. But I think it's very important that we take the time to be quiet and to go outside, you know, and to still our minds, even if it's just for a short while. And for me, writing is really a meditative thing, and so writing really helps me. And I don't know how it is for other people. I mean, some people keep journals, and I used to, but I don't any longer. But there's that, and there's just, you know, like having good company, and, you know, giving yourself a limited time to talk about politics and then talk about something pleasant. And, you know, I just think we have to keep renewing ourselves. I mean, we have to renew ourselves. And it's very hard. I think it's really hard when you're in a university, because you have, you're living in a world that's so abstract. And that's what happens when the trees disappear. The world becomes that more and more abstract. And if you're living in an intellectual world, and you reach an abstract point where you're living in your head, then it's really hard to renew and refresh yourself and to maintain. And Kate, you're such a good writer. You just don't worry about it, just write every day. Skip your classes now and then. Really, you guys, the writing is more important. You know, tell your students, give them a project in the library, you know.
This may segue on that other question. You read that wonderful poem, Return, and I wonder if you'd speak to your impulse, and there are other writers who are speaking of the return of the buffalo, who are invoking the ghost dance as something other than mythological and somehow actually churning some kind of change. How do you feel about those prospects?
The ghost dance?
Yeah, and the return of the buffalo.
The return of the buffalo? Well, I think the return of the buffalo is great as long as it's not a ranching process. You know, I think that if buffalo are treated like cattle, it doesn't work too well. I mean, it's not really the return of the buffalo. I think, you know, like, I live near Denver, close to Denver. That's the closest city. And when I drive down there and I see all those houses, I remember that Denver was a buffalo wallow at one time. The whole place was a big buffalo wallow. That's how many buffalo there were. Everywhere there's a house, there were buffalo. wallowing around in the mud, having a good time and living their lives the way they should have. The ghost dance was a real event. It was not a mythology. It was, there were two ghost dance movements, and they started at the Walker River Paiute Reservation. Was it Paiute Walker River? And the first one didn't work. It didn't go across the country, but the second one did. And Movoka was the leader of it. He wore a black hat, and he had people dance to try to bring the buffalo back. And, you know, maybe time is relative after all, and it did start to bring the buffalo back. Who knows? It did frighten the 25-year-old person who was in charge of the people who were ghost dancing in South Dakota. I was a young man, and he was only 25 years old, and he was the head of the agency at Pine Ridge. And he called in the cavalry because he was afraid of the spiritual movement of the ghost dance, part of which was actually incorporated a little Christianity, like the Native American church does. And so the people that were ghost dancing had no weapons and were shot and killed by the cavalry. The doctor at the time happened to be a Sani Sioux named Charles Eastman, who has written several books and was a medical doctor. And because he was Native, he couldn't practice. Nobody would come see him in Minnesota, where he was from. And so he ended up working as a doctor at the Pine Ridge Reservation area. So now those things are historical, they're very real, and they're very recent. I remind people that, you know, like I feel young, but I'm not that young anymore. But my grandmother was 7 years old at the time of the massacre at Wounded Knee. And she knew about it, and everybody knew about it all over the country. It doesn't take long. Tecumseh traveled all the way down to Mexico and further on horses to try to unite everybody against the Europeans, the Americans. I mean, he went everywhere. And not only that, he knew astronomy so well that he could predict like a comet. And he scared people. You know, and his name, I think Tecumseh also means something like shooting star, that he was named after the comet, the tail of the comet or something like that. So people had horses, they traveled. Before they had horses, they traveled. I mean, it was just, things were never secret. Nothing was quiet. I mean, nobody was isolated. There was trade everywhere. So you find shell in the Northeast and in the Northwest, and you find things from that part of the pipestone in the, California, and whalebone in different places. They had whalebone markers inland for graves at one time. Yes. One more question I think we have time for.
I just came back from San Francisco and I did a quick trip out to Alcatraz and was listening to you talk about finding, reclaiming place, and it made me really think about the American Indian movement when they reclaimed the Alcatraz Island, and I just thought maybe if you had anything that you could say about that. I watched the videos and it looked like a really powerful time in terms of coming together and people coming from all sorts of places to join the community that was created for over a year.
Well, that whole time, I think for Native peoples was really an important time because it sort of woke everybody up and politicized everyone. Even my father, we started getting Akwesasne notes and this newspaper that came out, and we read about the occupation at Wounded Knee, and then we read about Alcatraz, and people were taking food. I mean, everyone, there was a big movement. And there really was a movement. I mean, it happened, and it made a great change. It changed us. It changed all of us, and it changed this generation too, the new generation. So those were really important. I always think like Charlie Hill, the comedian, talking about filling out an application for a job, and they put previous occupations, and he wrote Wounded Knee, Alcatraz. But I wasn't there. I'm sorry. I was trying to earn a living somewhere, I guess. I don't know what I was doing, but we were keeping up with it. Yes.
Did you write stories about other Native Americans and their culture ways?
Do I write stories about other natives, other tribes? What I actually do is I start, my first novel was set in Oklahoma, and a lot of it was family story, but it was set in a fictional place. And everyone thought that it should be history, and they'd say, well, that hill wasn't there. And that there was never a cave over there. These are, because it was in grasslands where some of these things occurred. And so I thought, well, this is really frustrating because Anglo writers can do anything they want. Nobody ever says, well, you can't do that because, the Chickasaw, that's not a Chickasaw book, or that's whatever. And so what I do now is I just make up tribes. So I create tribes. So in my book, Power, the tribe, it's based on a true event, but I created the name of the tribe and I changed the gender of the people. And in Solar Storms, it's about James Bay Hydro-Quebec, the project that went on up there. And it's also about adoption, and it was written for one of my grandchildren who was sent out for adoption, but now she lives 10 minutes away, and she's going to have a baby. I'm going to be a great-grandma.
Did you ever write a story in my past about Native Americans here? Like the true stories that happened, like the Battle of the Little Big Mound or anything like that?
No, that's your job. That's your job. You write those stories.